So let's now move on to our next panel, which is a panel that we've had now running for several years. It's on data and digital sciences. And a statistic in kind of kicking off this panel is that last year there were 1,300 trials, still a minority of the clinical trials, but 1,300 trials that had full virtual or decentralized components to it, which represents a 28% increase from the year prior and a 93% increase from 2020. So we're skyrocketing in terms of implementing digital and data. Chairing and moderating this panel will be a real leader in this field. It's Chris Benko, who's the founder and CEO of Koneksa Health, which is a digital technology company developing measures to increase the precision with which we can study a variety of different biomarkers and endpoints in patients. Chris works extensively with a number of biopharmaceutical companies, and Chris is well-known influence. He's a well-known influencer and peripatetic in the biopharmaceutical field. And I would guess that almost everybody knows Chris, so he probably doesn't need the nice introduction that I just gave him. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Chris, into the panel.
Thanks, Andy, for that lovely introduction. It's still much appreciated. I have an incredibly esteemed panel here today, so I'm really excited to be leading this discussion. And we have an opportunity to really cover a great spectrum of where data and digital can be having an impact and where it is having an impact, all the way from the target ID and discovery space through how we optimize clinical trials. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists today in their introductory comments to just give us a quick tour of what they're seeing as the spectrum of technologies having the greatest impact versus ones that might still be emerging or even quite early. But each of them have different specific examples that they're going to walk us through that I think will be enlightening in terms of understanding how much the field is progressing and where we still have great opportunities. To kick this off, we're going to go with Sastry Chilukuri, who is the co-CEO of a company that we greatly admire, Medidata Solutions. I say we greatly admire because we have a lot of alumni from Sastry's organization in my own company, which gives us a strong bond and affiliation for what their organization accomplishes. And Sastry is in France today. I think he might be held back a little bit from coming home via travel. So if he's moving around a little bit, it's understandable. It's the fun of the Paris airport. So Sastry, over to you. I'd love for you to kick us off with your thoughts and examples.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Andy. This is a truly incredible opportunity to share what we're seeing progress in terms of digital and AI across the field of life sciences. And it's been a tremendous amount of progress we've been talking about year on year. So the three big areas where I see an incredible amount of promise, the first is the advancement of synthetic controls and external controls, and more broadly, the application of real-world data in trial design. The two examples I'd put forth for the audience here, the first is we at Medidata now have assisted 4 different applications, 3 with the FDA as well as 1 with the EMA, to be able to get FDA approval using an external control arm. And these are in really difficult to treat therapeutic areas like glioblastoma, et cetera, where the standard of care hasn't evolved sufficiently. And by replacing a significant number of patients on the control arm using historic trial data or real-world data patients to actual new treatments, as well as in parallel improve the overall chances of this drug coming to market. And in parallel to the control arm, we're also using these data sets to be able to build algorithms much earlier to either drive endpoints or to classify patient subpopulations. And most recently at ASCO, we presented our findings in building an algorithm with 87% accuracy in predicting patients at risk for cytokine release syndrome in CAR T therapies. This is an area that continues to advance the overall development space, clinical development space around use of synthetic control arms and better trial design. The second area that Andy mentioned is around decentralized trials. It used to be a scientific concept, and Medidata was instrumental 10 years ago around the first fully decentralized trial adaptable, but it didn't really take off. But now, with COVID, we're seeing the tremendous amount of uptake and mainstream use of decentralized technologies. We've gone away from saying is e-consent and e-pro part of a decentralized piece to actually talking about virtual visits, remote drug supplies, as well as the ability to be able to do sensors and wearables. All of these are dramatically improvement overall patient experience in clinical trials, as well as helping with the recruitment. Because we all know how difficult it is to recruit in many of these therapeutic areas, but by reducing site burden, investigator burden, and patient burden through these decentralized technologies, it makes clinical trials much easier to participate in. And then the third area, given this is USAIC, I want to bring out is just the continued progress in India around the field of data science. We continue to hire aggressively in India, and there are very few areas in the world where you get on programmers. And what gets us even more excited is the amount of passion that the talent brings to healthcare. They genuinely want to be part of what we're doing and what we're solving. And while everyone is talking about the great resignation, our retention we're getting for our hiring has never been higher. And we continue to see India emerge as a powerhouse in the whole space of digital and AI in healthcare. In terms of the areas of limitations, the one area I and all of us continue to see a challenge in terms of adoption of these AI technologies. There are clients we've worked with who are instantaneous believers, and they immediately switch over to using AI and digital technologies, and many of them have actually said they want to come work with us. And then there are others that we just struggle to try to convince and build. And it's understandable. The equivalence that I would draw is to autonomous vehicles. We all know that in 5 years, autonomous vehicles are going to be pretty mainstream. But now, from now till then, when do you trust the vehicle to drive? When do you with your life is something we all are trying to figure out. And it's the same thing with the application of AI and digital technologies in drug discovery and development and life sciences is how do we do this transition from doing it manually to trusting the machines to get it done for us? With that, Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Sastry. That was an awesome range of examples. And I think given Medidata's visibility across the spectrum of clinical development in the world, you bring a fantastic perspective there. I'd like to go to the early stage for our next two discussions. And so I'm really pleased to have my friend and former colleague, Karen Akinsanya, here to talk to us. She's the president of research at Schrodinger. So Karen, could you tell us a little bit more about the areas you're working in and what you're excited about?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and really happy to be here to discuss this important topic. One of the things that we're pretty excited about, and obviously we're very immersed and involved in this, but it's happening more broadly, I think, in our industry, is the impact of digital approaches, data-driven digital approaches that are allowing us now to access accurate protein structures. That's one example I'm going to point to, and the ability to apply digital chemistry approaches to accelerate efficient identification and optimization of tractable, high-quality chemical matter for a broader set of drug targets. The challenge I think we've had in the past is that not having accurate protein structures has really limited our ability to drug certain targets. And we've actually gone after antibodies because it was difficult to go after small molecules. Well, now what we're seeing, and I think everybody's very familiar with AlphaFold, but predicted protein structures and the ability of predicted protein structures to now allow us to go after even experimental structures of more complex targets. This is having a pretty profound effect at Schrodinger. It's having, I think, a profound effect across the biopharma space. There's a little bit of sort of excitement that precedes the application. You've all seen the articles about now having predicted structures completely solves the drug discovery problem. Well, of course, that's not true. You do have a lot of steps that are required, as we all know, to go from a predicted protein structure to a high quality drug. I think the other space, in addition to digital chemistry, which is now, I think, more routinely allowing us to get to clinical candidates in around 2, if not 3 years, which we're excited about because it provides the opportunity for the industry to test more therapeutic hypotheses, right? When you have high quality chemical matter, you can take that into the clinic and ask your very best questions. The other side of this, of course, is digital's impact on biology. And I think we are seeing now the ability to derive important biological insights from genomic, phenomic, and proteomic data that are collected not just on individuals, but on populations at a scale now where it's providing us with improved insights that will allow us to influence target selection, biomarker selection, patient selection, and stratification. So I think this wave of sort of data that we have access to, but also the application of accurate digital methods is having a really important impact in the early space. And I'll say that, GPCRs, for example, that have always been very challenging to get structures of experimentally, it's pretty clear now that some of these predicted structures allow you to go after drug discovery programs for pretty complicated targets and be successful. The combination of these digital chemistry and digital biology approaches, I think, is going to have a really important impact on our ability to prioritize programs, to accelerate programs to the point where we can actually test more ideas in the clinic. In terms of where we're making progress, but where there are still challenges, I would say that, of course, having access to these digital methods is only the really beginning of the challenge of coming up with a drug candidate. And when we think about our ability to leverage a predict first mindset, that is challenged in the areas of ADME and toxicology. We are obviously able now to do a lot more in terms of predicting PK behavior using a PBPK modeling to predict human dose predictions, to look at population PK, subset analysis in terms of PK based on modeling approaches. And there are companies who are very focused on that, and that's been adopted broadly by the industry. But ADME issues, the ability to predict DDI, the ability to predict safety in humans, those are areas where, first of all, we don't necessarily have a combined brain trust, if you like, or data set across the whole industry for programs where we have seen toxicological findings. We don't have a unified data set. And so people are working with very small data sets trying to predict toxicological findings. We've had progress, obviously, in the area of Lilly. But if we're to think about this as a sort of systems biology issue, having access to all of the toxicological data from pharma companies, for example, which I don't believe has yet been made available in a unified way, that's going to hold us back to some degree. Toxicogenomics obviously is making a huge huge progress, but we lack this sort of unified view of the systems biology that we've learned from not just efficacy studies, but also toxicology studies. And I think that's an area for further research that and cooperation across the industry that will help us with that important challenge as we move molecules towards the clinic. In terms of some of the barriers that we still face, I will say that, the term AI itself has, I think, perhaps created larger expectations for what we're able to accomplish with computation. I think in certain areas that rely heavily on pattern recognition, AI is powerful. But the idea that you can apply AI to everything, I think, is creating a sort of cycle of expectations and disappointment, perhaps, that ultimately can harm the overall effort in digital and sort of data science and its ability to truly have an impact on drug discovery and development. And so the validation of these methods, I think, is absolutely critical. It requires a sort of a phase in which we're experimenting, but where we're really drawing conclusions about how impactful these AI sort of based methods are. And I mean, if you think about drug discovery as a pattern recognition problem, I think that's going to limit our ability to really leverage the sort of power of this computation approach in areas where it clearly can have significant impact. If you think about AI on images and what's going on in terms of looking at patient responses at the tissue level, using image recognition, amazing things happening there where you can start to see changes in response at the image level. But when we talk about AI more broadly having significant impact, I think it's creating a situation where pharma perhaps is less convinced by the overall impact, because there's a lot of noise and energy around fundraising, for example, for AI, but there's not a lot of great examples of how that's really moving the needle. It's in the drug discovery space. And I think Sastry said something interesting about adoption. I think we are still challenged with this transition from really trusting some of the more accurate methods, where companies are still using very traditional methods and are taking their time to assess those, but perhaps not moving as quickly as we could in areas where this is clearly well validated and having a real impact on timelines.
Awesome, Karen. I really appreciate those points around how we manage expectations and understand this space. And especially, it's fun to be a part of panels like this where we have an opportunity to sort of raise the acumen collectively so we can have a better understanding of how to appreciate these technologies and their potential. I do want to remind everyone I made an error in not saying this up front. We will have a polling question at the end, so I will be turning it back to Andy for that. So make sure that you look out for your polling question. Building perfectly on what Karen was just speaking about, I'm excited that we have Regina to go next, who is a distinguished faculty member focused on AI and health at MIT. So I would love, Regina, for you to kind of build on where Karen was going and take us back to some of the things we were talking about the other day in prepping for this panel in terms of where we have some really interesting processes that are being designed and adopted broadly across the industry. So look forward to hearing what you can offer us on that.
Everybody, and it was great to hear Karen's point of view about it, and clearly the work that we're doing here at MIT is very related to really early stages of discovery, and I think this is a place where a lot of really exciting changes happen in the last 5 years. And it's really nice to see, because we broadly collaborate with multiple pharmaceutical companies, both kind of big pharma and also biotechs, that a lot of tools that we and others developed in the machine learning space broadly used in pharma. For instance, there are a lot of models for property prediction. Karen was talking about, various ADME properties, toxicity, and others. These tools are used in many of this pharmaceutical industry, and they are really becoming better and better. And one of the interesting changes that happened recently, that previously it was really an area of medicinal chemistry, but right now, with a big interest from the core machine learning community, a lot of people who are really core machine learners are working on these particular problems, and technologies continue to improve all the time. So I would say property prediction is one of such examples, lead optimization, generating small molecules with desired properties. All these areas are already, we already see the first generation deploy, and the new models that are coming up are better and stronger. It was very interesting to see how the field changed after the introduction of the AlphaFold. So now the barrier between kind of the small molecule world and biologics becomes closer and closer. Even if you are working really on small molecules and you're trying to predict some properties, many times this property are really related to binding to proteins. So even if you're coming from the small molecule perspective, you do want to understand what exactly the small molecule is doing. So having access to structure is really important. And one of the biggest, kind of advancement in the last year was development of new methods for docking, for binding, and for affinity predictions, which are outperforming commercial tools. And I would see that, again, progress in this area is just going to continue because these problems are kind of formalized already for machine learning community to jump in and solve this problem even better. So let me talk a bit about areas where I think there is still an interesting kind of opportunity to improve. So one point that Karen actually made, she was talking about, antibodies. So what we discovered when we applied, AlphaFold to them, it actually didn't work because the models are trained on a particular data sets. And whenever you're training it on those data sets, when you're applying it to a very different structures, it just doesn't work. There are other kind of case scenarios that the original paper identifies, and so there are places where you can already take it and use it, but there are many other places where still the new technology needs to be developed. But even if we're abstracting from the AlphaFold and we're talking about the world of small molecules, or anything else, one big question is how you can generalize better. So if you are those who are listening to me coming from natural language or computer vision, the way in computer vision you are dividing your data, you just randomly split training and test. But in chemistry, this is not good enough because you really, in drug discovery, want to apply these models to totally new chemical spaces. So you need to generalize much better and much stronger, not to be very close to the same space where you were trained. And this is really a big question for the machine learning community. How can you create this very strong generalization algorithms? And this very much relates to people in other areas related to clinical trials and other more medical questions, is fairness. How do you make sure that kind of your methods work in all different parts of the space, or if it cannot be applied there, it actually tells you that it cannot be applied. And this is an area where I think we really have a big place still to go. And finally, one really exciting things that I think we're not quite there yet, but we have an opportunity, is really bringing chemistry and biology together. Again, people today who do modeling of molecular structures, they operate on the molecules in some particular, maybe some readout like IC50 or whatever, some measurement. But what you ideally want to do is really to understand what this molecule is doing. And Karen was also alluding to this kind of point that we want to bring structure from system biology and other things. So it requires totally rethinking about machine learning when you are modeling this very complex system, which both have the molecules, the proteins, and all other information. So I'm really looking forward to the next few years where we can bring the two together.
That's awesome, Regina. So I'm conscious we've got a little bit less than 20 minutes left. These panels are always, they seem to blow by. Daphne, you have an amazing range, and Vipin, I think we can now, bring this back toward the clinic with both of you. But Daphne, you've been an investor and an entrepreneur across a range of technology-oriented innovations, from prescription digital therapeutics through digital biomarkers like the stuff that our company works on. Talk to us about what you're seeing that's interesting in terms of the clinical and human impact. And hopefully let's keep this kind of quick and interactive, and we'll make sure that we leave some room for a question or two at the end.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So one of the areas that I think is really an emerging important area for digital is in the area of mental health. So if you think about it, telemedicine has become a standard way of delivering mental health care, and it makes sense that digital therapeutics that are clinically validated are a logical next step. So what we're seeing is demand for non-drug options or complementary non-drug options to current drugs is growing dramatically, both at the patient and payer levels. And when I say clinically validated, that's a really important distinction because, for example, Achilles EndeavorRx, which we were involved in developing, is now FDA cleared for pediatric ADHD. It's a game-like interface that is based on cognitive interference processing. So what's interesting about, for example, the pivotal study that Achilles ran it was designed to look at the specific Achilles active ingredient or active component. And the way they set it up was that it was a randomized double-blind placebo or sham-controlled study where the sham was a word game, which was pre-tested to have expectation of benefit. And that was really important because then when they met their primary endpoint, you know that you saw differentiation versus a game, another game-like interface. So we were able to show that had relevance. And I think that is an area where we're going to see continued exciting new therapeutics, and Achilles in the midst of launching their product broadly in pediatric ADHD. So that's one area. Now, on the other end of that, I think there's something like 20,000 mental health apps. Of those, about 5 are FDA cleared, like Achilles, and very few, maybe a dozen or up to 20, I think, have actual clinical data that's high quality, like I just described. So that's a challenge for the area because there's noise around the things that don't work, that are not clinically validated, and sometimes that sort of drowns out the things that are going to have an impact in the clinic and for patients. Now, an area that I think is very exciting and promising, but is still sort of right at the edge of having an impact, is what you touched on, which is digital biomarkers. And if you think about continuing on the theme of remote health monitoring and intervention, we've been really interested in the concept of voice as a digital biomarker because it's impacted by so many different health conditions. So this actually goes beyond the mental health conditions. When we speak, we're using 100 muscles, our respiratory system, our brain, of course, cardiovascular system, and slight deviations can be measured and connected to those conditions. Karun, we hear you, sorry. So the technology that Sonda's developed, we developed at PureTech as well. They've already taken 1.2 million voice samples from over 85,000 individuals from 4 continents in 10 different languages. And as a result of that, you're getting a diverse data set, and we know the importance of breadth and diversity when you're looking at data. So the technology works on 5 seconds of speech in the wild collection. When I say in the wild, that's like on your Alexa on your phone, and they have, for example, a partnership with Qualcomm. So they're envisioning applications where your phone wakes up based on health signals or where you could remotely monitor. And I think in terms of application for pharma, where does this get interesting? So you think about, of course, clinical trials and being able to identify responders, being able to select patients, but also if you think about launch and commercial applications around direct-to-consumer engagement, for example, being able to differentiate between a headache and a migraine and provide the right, connection to a therapeutic. So those are some of the areas I'm really excited about. And as I mentioned, I think the areas that need a lot of work are the unvalidated, sort of overhyped mental health apps that don't have any clinical data behind them.
I love it, Daphne. And it really, it's just so phenomenal to have a panel that has experience with the things that are being applied, where we're applying some of the greatest rigor to ensure that we can have the maximum impact and to make sure that those really do separate from the pack and the noise. Vipin, I'd love for you to bring us home. I'm sorry to put you last in the group of 5, but one of the things I'm excited for you to sort of share are where can we have really a dramatic operational impact on how we actually execute and get drugs to patients. And I think you bring a great perspective to that. So at the end stages of the process, that's when we actually get medicines into the hands of the people who need them. So tell us more about where data and digital is having that kind of impact from your vantage point as head of data and analytics for Lilly.
Thank you, Chris, and great comments from the fellow panelists. Let me bring this home by maybe talking about some of the key metrics for the industry, right? So we know it takes about 10 years to bring a drug to the market, $2.5 billion on an average. And the success rate of drugs that are in phase 1 to eventually make to the market is 12%. That means 88% fail somewhere along the way. As an AI optimist, I feel strongly that AI ML technologies will have a significant impact on all of these metrics that matter for the industry. And I can specifically go into the timeline metric in terms of clinical trial timelines. One of the things that we have been focused on is really asking the question, how can we bring machine learning approaches to shorten our clinical trial timelines? I mean, this is an area for the longest time the industry has used gut feel, experiential decision making, often based on relationships with investigators and sites and so on and so forth. We said, hey, we have a tremendous amount of data from historical clinical trials, performance of sites on those clinical trials, et cetera, et cetera. And how can we actually use machine learning methods for any given new trial so that we can make better operational decisions in that space? Over the years, we started with a couple of trials, 3 or 4 years ago. And now we are at a point where it's our endeavor to apply our models, advanced analytical models, to do decisioning such as site selection to every single trial that we do. And we have seen tremendous opportunities there. It's not just site selection where we see the opportunities. Every other aspect of clinical trial operationalization, such as how do we increase the diversity in our clinical trials? How do we actually reduce the patient burden? How do you quantify the patient burden and optimize our operationalization of our trials to minimize patient burden? How do you reduce protocol amendments before they happen? There is research that says that 60% of protocol amendments that slows down our overall timelines could be avoided. So if you look at different dimensions of clinical trial design and operationalization, there are opportunities, huge opportunities that we have actually done at Lilly to really address those questions with machine learning methods on a very fundamental aspects of what we do with our overall clinical trial processes. In terms of where we can really see where there are barriers and so on and so forth, I agree with all of the comments that the previous panelists made. I do think that there is a question of timelines with respect to what is possible today and what is possible 10 years from now. And again, as an optimist in this field, sometimes what is possible in 10 years, when we attempt it today, and if it doesn't work, I think it really doesn't help with the overall notion of the opportunities of AI, ML in our space. So I think it is important for our community to really set expectations of what is possible today and what are the things that we should work towards 5 years and 10 years from now, so that we can execute on the right problems and solve them in a meaningful fashion today and in 10 years.
Vipin, I really love that we brought this back to how do we manage expectations, and I think I think I can probably speak for a number of us in saying that as folks who innovate around data science and digital, we face sort of many of the same challenges in other areas of drug development, right? We look at things like siRNA therapeutics or mRNA therapeutics, all concepts that we expected or hoped would deliver before they actually did, but were worth waiting for in terms of the impact that they could have. And so understanding that digital innovation faces some of those same challenges, sometimes we get really excited early, but if we manage those expectations carefully, we're patient, we're diligent, we're rigorous, we can have that differentiated impact. Karun, I hope we have time for an audience question. I think we do. I thought the panel was till 11:20. So if I'm correct, can you open us up to a question, perhaps? I think maybe Simone is positioned to share her observations or ask a question of all of us or one of us.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah, I actually have a question across the panelists. Very, very interesting. Loved all your comments. But I really want to ask about the talent angle and what skill sets. I mean, I and most of us grew up as biologists. I didn't really know very much about machine learning. I couldn't evaluate it myself. So what skill sets do we need for this new era of data science? And, how are companies recruiting and integrating those skill sets? And is that in any way going to be rate limiting for how fast they're adopted across the drug development continuum?
As a recovering HR executive, I think that's a phenomenal question, Simone. And as somebody trying to build a company, gosh, this stuff is really hard, right? We're trying to form new connections and bridge skill sets that are very different. I'd love to know from the panelists who has a strong opinion to share on that, because I recognize that you all see this challenge and probably from different perspectives.
Yeah, I can. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, I do think that there is an emerging worldwide shortage of computational chemists. I think we're seeing that for real, both in our ability to identify talent, but also I think as these methods become more prevalent in pharma and the biopharma industry, the demand will grow and perhaps the talent is there. So I think we do need to invest in education so that the pipeline is strong. And that's something we're very heavily doing all the way from high school through universities, making sure that people have the right training. I do also want to say that there is a global picture here. Sastry commented earlier on the ability to hire talent in India. Given the conference that we're at today, I do just want to acknowledge there is tremendous talent around the globe in this regard. And we've been really very impressed with the talent that we've been able to find. But globally, we do need to train people who have traditional disciplines like chemistry, but also an understanding and a cross-training in things like machine learning.
Vipin, it sounded like you were going to add something as well there.
Yes, I would like to emphasize the critical importance of multidisciplinary teams. The best way for us to make progress in this space is to bring people with different backgrounds all in one room, virtually or otherwise. We need computer scientists working with computational chemists and biologists, bringing their own expertise so that collectively we have the pieces that we need to advance the field. And the example that I gave earlier on, I don't think it would have happened if we didn't bring a multidisciplinary team together.
Amen to that one. Daphne, I want to ask you just a last comment on this topic, and then we probably have to go to the poll. I know you have the experience of building a company where you have to blend some of this innovative talent with people that understand the industry and drug development from a more traditional perspective. What's that like as it relates to the question that Simone posed?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages we have as an industry is we have a very good value proposition for people from the tech world, where they're doing things that are fun, that are interesting, but they're not really making a difference in people's lives and affecting disease, which is what we're doing in the industry. So I actually think we have a really powerful recruiting tool in bringing folks from tech in. And for us, it's been really fun. I mean, we have people, game designers from LucasArts working with, hardcore, scientists. And it's, I think, I agree with that cross-disciplinary perspective. That's where, between and beyond disciplines is where some of the greatest inventions happen. So, yeah.
I love it. Andy, I think I'm to turn it back to you to talk about our polling question as we wrap up this session.
Great. Thank you very much,